I've always been a light sleeper. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside my window, it all wakes me up. So when I heard the soft click of my bedroom door opening one night, I was instantly alert. My eyes snapped open, adjusting to the darkness. A silhouette stood at the foot of my bed, motionless. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice steadier than I felt. The figure didn't move. Then, it leaned forward slightly, and I saw it, a glint in its eyes. Not the reflection of moonlight, but something else. Something calculating. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized it was watching me. Watching me sleep. "Dad?" I ventured, hoping against hope that it was him, drunk or sleepwalking. But the figure just chuckled softly, a sound that sent ice through my veins. No, this wasn't my dad. This was something else entirely. I reached for my phone on the bedside table, my fingers brushing against something unfamiliar. It felt like glass? I picked it up, bringing it closer to my face. It was small, cylindrical, and pointed at me. A camera. Hidden in my lamp. My heart pounded as realization dawned on me. This wasn't a one-off incident. No, this was planned. Deliberate. Someone had been watching me, invading my privacy in the most intimate way possible. But who? And why? The figure retreated silently, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and the tiny camera in my hand. I knew I should tell someone, but who? Who could I trust when I didn't even know who to suspect? I decided then that I wouldn't just lie down and take this. No, I'd find out who was doing this. And when I did, well, let's just say they'd regret the day they chose my room for their twisted little games. But little did I know, uncovering the truth would lead me down a dark path filled with secrets, betrayals, and desires so sinister, it would change everything. Including me. The next morning, I couldn't shake off the unease. Every creak of the floorboard, every rustle of my curtains made me jump. I felt violated, exposed. But I also felt angry. Whoever was doing this would not get away with it. I racked my brain trying to figure out who could have done it. My dad's friends were the most likely suspects, they had easy access to our house, knew my routine. One name kept floating to the top of my thoughts, Mark. Mark was a friend of my dad's from way back. He'd been around since I was a kid, always a bit too friendly, his laughs a tad too loud. His eyes, well, they were always just a little too interested in me. But I'd never thought he'd go this far. When he arrived that evening for our weekly dinner, I watched him closely. He seemed normal enough, laughing at my dad's jokes, helping himself to seconds. But there was something different about his eyes today. They kept darting towards me, then away again, like he knew something I didn't. I excused myself after dinner, pulling Mark aside as he headed for the living room. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He raised an eyebrow, but followed me to my room. As soon as we were inside, I closed the door behind us and turned to face him. "Did you put a camera in my lamp?" Mark laughed, a sound that grated on my nerves. "What are you talking about, kiddo? Why would I do something like that?" But his eyes, they flickered with something dark. Something guilty. "Don't lie to me, Mark," I said, steeling myself for whatever was coming next. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, it's not what you think, Dash. Not what I think. You've been watching me sleep. How is that not creepy?" I spat back, anger boiling over. Mark shrugged, trying to play it cool. "It's just a little harmless fun. No big deal." Harmless fun? My blood ran cold at his words. This was far from harmless. But before I could respond, he walked out, leaving me alone with my rage and fear. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought I heard something outside my door. I froze, listening intently. It came again, a soft click, followed by the slow creak of wood. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized someone was trying to open my door. I switched on my bedside lamp just as the door opened. There stood Mark, silhouetted against the hallway light. He looked at me, then down at the camera still in my hand from last night. "What are you doing here?" I whispered, terror making my voice quiver. He smiled, a slow, predatory smile that made my skin crawl. "Just admiring the view," he said softly before turning around and leaving as quietly as he'd come. I sat there, shaken, until dawn broke. Mark's words echoed in my mind, just admiring the view. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a denial. It was a confession. And it scared me to my core. From that moment on, I knew I had to be careful. Because Mark wasn't going to stop. Not until he got what he wanted. And I had no idea how far he'd go to get it. After that night, I knew I had to be smart about this. Confronting Mark again wouldn't do any good, he'd just deny it or twist my words. No, I needed evidence. Something concrete to prove what he was doing and stop him once and for all. So, I played along, acting like nothing had happened. When Mark visited, I greeted him with a smile, chatted with him at dinner, even laughed at his stupid jokes. Inside, though, I seethed. But I bided my time, waiting for the right moment to strike back. I started by installing hidden cameras of my own, tiny, discreet ones that Mark would never find. One in my room, pointing at the door, another in the hallway outside my bedroom. If he wanted to watch me, then I'd make sure to record every move he made. Days turned into weeks as I waited for something, anything, to happen. Mark seemed content with his little peeks into my life, never going beyond watching from afar. It was infuriating. I needed him to slip up, to do something that would incriminate him once and for all. One afternoon, when I was supposed to be out shopping with friends, I heard the soft click of my bedroom door opening. My heart leapt into my throat as I realized Mark had taken the bait. He thought he was alone, safe in his little perversion. But he wasn't. I watched on my phone screen as Mark entered my room, looking around furtively before making himself comfortable on my bed. He ran his hands over my pillows, inhaling deeply like some kind of creepy stalker/pervert. Bile rose in my throat at the sight, but I forced myself to keep watching. He pulled out a small notebook from his pocket, flipping through pages filled with neat handwriting. My stomach churned as I realized it was notes about me, when I slept, when I woke up, what I did in my room. He'd been studying me like some kind of twisted science project. But then he started reading aloud from a different page. A page filled with my words. My thoughts. My secrets. It was my journal, the one I kept hidden under my mattress. The one I thought no one knew about. I wish Mom were here. She'd know what to do. Mark read, his voice mocking as he parroted the words I'd written in a moment of weakness. He laughed, a cold, harsh sound that made me want to scream. He kept reading, each word like a knife twisting in my gut. My innermost fears, my hopes, my dreams all laid bare for him to laugh at. It was humiliating, violating in a way even his hidden cameras hadn't been. But I didn't look away. No, I watched every moment of it, recorded every twisted word. Because this was the proof I needed. This was Mark's downfall. As he finally left my room, whistling like he didn't have a care in the world, I felt a surge of triumph mixed with disgust. He thought he'd gotten away with something today. But little did he know, he'd just sealed his own fate. Now it was time to set the trap. Time to make Mark pay for what he'd done. And this time, there'd be no escaping the consequences. I spent the rest of that day simmering with rage and humiliation. Mark had taken something sacred to me, my thoughts, my feelings, and twisted it into his own perverse game. I couldn't let him get away with this. But acting rashly wouldn't do any good. No, I needed a plan. A solid, foolproof way to expose Mark for what he was and make sure he'd never bother me or anyone else again. Days turned into a week as I waited for the right opportunity. Then, one evening, my dad mentioned they were going out for drinks with some of their friends, including Mark. My heart raced at the chance this presented. Tonight, while everyone was out, I'd search Mark's place and find more evidence against him. Under the cover of darkness, I slipped into Mark's house using a spare key he'd given my dad in case of emergencies. His home was quiet, eerie in its stillness. I moved quickly, my eyes scanning every surface for anything that might incriminate him. His study was where I found it, a hidden folder on his computer filled with images and videos. Videos of me, taken from the camera he'd planted in my lamp. There were others too, girls around my age, all of them unaware they were being watched. My stomach churned as I realized how extensive Mark's sick little operation was. But there was more. Much more. Buried among the files, I found a chat log between Mark and someone going by the username The Watcher. They talked about us, me, the other girls, like we were objects, things to be collected and studied. The Watcher praised Mark's skills in infiltrating our lives, his patience in gathering information. I felt violated all over again, but I pushed through the nausea rising in my throat. I needed more evidence. Something that would tie Mark directly to these crimes. And then I saw it, a journal on his desk, filled with neat handwriting. It was similar to the one he'd read from in my room, but this one was different. This one had names, dates, locations. Details about each girl, when they were home alone, their routines. It was like a twisted little black book of his victims. I flipped through the pages, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I saw it, my name, scrawled in Mark's distinctive handwriting. Next to it, dates and times, notes about my habits, my fears, all of it laid out for anyone to see. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just some creepy stalker behavior. No, this was something far more sinister. Mark had been studying us, planning his moves carefully. He'd been grooming us, turning our own lives against us. I took pictures of everything, the chat logs, the journal, the videos, sending them to myself as backup. Then I heard it, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My heart leapt into my throat as I realized Mark was home early. Panic surged through me as I quickly put everything back in its place and rushed towards the front door. But it was too late. As I turned the handle, I came face to face with Mark himself. Well, he said, a cold smile spreading across his face. What do we have here? I froze, terror gripping me like a vice. I'd been so careful, but now I was trapped. Alone in his house, caught red-handed. And there was no telling what Mark might do to keep his sick little secrets buried. But I wouldn't go down without a fight. Not after everything he'd done. Not when I had the proof right here, tucked away safely on my phone. No matter what happened next, I knew one thing for certain: Mark's days of watching us in secret were over. And soon, everyone would know exactly who he really was. The next few days were a blur. I kept my distance from Mark, but I could feel his eyes on me, watchful and calculating. He knew I'd found out about his sick little games, and I had no doubt he was trying to figure out what to do about it. But I wasn't going to make this easy for him. No, I'd play dumb, act like nothing had changed while I planned my next move. Because now that I knew the truth, there was no way I could just let it go. Not after everything he'd done. I spent hours poring over the evidence I'd gathered, trying to find a connection between Mark and the Watcher. If I could expose them both, maybe then this nightmare would finally be over. But my investigation would have to wait for now. My dad had plans for us that weekend, a family camping trip with some friends, including Mark. I tried to beg off, citing homework or any other excuse I could think of, but Dad wouldn't hear it. "It'll do you good to get away from all this," he insisted, waving his hand vaguely at my laptop and notebooks. So there I was, sitting around a campfire with Mark just a few feet away, laughing and joking like nothing was wrong. It took every ounce of self-control not to scream, not to leap across the fire and confront him right then and there. But I held it together, smiling through gritted teeth as he regaled us all with stories from back in the day. Inside, though, I seethed. I couldn't wait to see his smug face crumble when I exposed him for the monster he was. The first night passed relatively peacefully, despite my churning stomach and racing thoughts. But on the second night, as everyone else drifted off to their tents, I found myself still wide awake, unable to shake off the unease settling over me like a heavy blanket. I decided to take a walk, needing some fresh air to clear my mind. The forest was quiet, the only sound the distant hoot of an owl and the rustle of leaves overhead. I walked along the path leading deeper into the woods, my flashlight cutting through the darkness ahead. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, just as a figure emerged from the shadows. Mark. He stumbled towards me, his eyes glassy and unfocused. The stench of alcohol wafted off him in waves. "Mark," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, despite the fear gripping me. "What are you doing here?" He laughed, a harsh sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Looking for you, of course," he slurred, taking another step closer. His eyes gleamed with something I'd never seen before, a hunger that made my skin crawl. I took a step back, trying to keep some distance between us. "You shouldn't be here," I warned, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark just chuckled, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "And why not? You're alone, aren't you? Just like in your room." Revulsion surged through me as I realized what he was implying. He thought this was it, the perfect opportunity to finally act on all those sick fantasies of his. "No," I said firmly, my voice stronger now. "I'm not alone. My dad's nearby. And so are our friends. You need to leave." But Mark didn't listen. Instead, he took another step closer, reaching out to grab my arm. His fingers dug into my flesh, squeezing painfully as he pulled me towards him. "You think you're special?" he growled, his breath hot and stale against my face. "You think I can't have you whenever I want?" Terror rooted me to the spot as I realized this was it, the moment everything changed. The moment Mark finally showed his true colors. But then something inside me snapped. Rage boiling over, I wrenched my arm free from his grasp and shoved him away with all my might. He staggered back, surprise flashing across his face, before he lunged at me again. We struggled, each trying to gain the upper hand as we tumbled to the ground. His hands roamed wildly, grabbing at anything they could find, my hair, my clothes, my skin. I kicked and screamed, fighting with everything I had to keep him away from me. And then, suddenly, he was gone. Someone had pulled him off me, holding him back as he struggled and snarled like a wild animal. Through the haze of terror and adrenaline, I saw it was one of our friends, a guy named Tom, who'd been camping nearby. Tom held Mark at bay while I scrambled to my feet, trembling all over. My clothes were torn, my skin bruised where Mark had grabbed me. But more than anything, I felt dirty. Violated in the most intimate way possible. As Tom dragged Mark away, still kicking and screaming, I couldn't help but think one thing: this wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this. Not ever. But it had. And now there was no going back. No pretending none of this ever happened. Because everything had changed in that moment, me, Mark, our lives, everything. And as I stood there, alone in the darkness with nothing but my racing thoughts and pounding heart for company, I knew one thing for certain: I would never be the same again. And neither would he. The next morning, I woke up to find Tom sitting by my side, his eyes filled with concern. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly. I shrugged, not really sure how to answer that question. Physically, I was sore and bruised, but it was the emotional pain that cut deepest. The violation, the betrayal, it felt like a part of me had been shattered beyond repair. "I'm sorry," Tom said, taking my hand in his. "I should have been there sooner." I squeezed his hand gratefully. "You saved me, Tom. That's all that matters." But even as I said the words, I knew this was far from over. Mark was still out there, free to hurt someone else if I didn't stop him. I decided then and there that I wouldn't let fear control my life any longer. No, I'd take back power, make Mark face the consequences of his actions. And I knew exactly how to do it. The first thing on my list was moving out. There was no way I could stay in my dad's house with Mark still having easy access to me. So, I packed up my things and found a small apartment nearby, using some savings I'd stashed away for emergencies. Next, I changed my number, blocking Mark from contacting me ever again. Then came the hardest part, telling my dad what had happened. I broke down as soon as I started talking, but somehow, I managed to get it all out. Every twisted detail, every sick fantasy Mark had forced upon me. My dad listened in shock and horror, his face growing pale with each passing moment. When I finished, he pulled me into a tight hug, tears streaming down both our faces. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he whispered. "I was scared," I admitted. "And ashamed. Like it was my fault somehow." My dad shook his head vehemently. "This is not your fault, sweetheart. None of this is. Mark will pay for what he's done, I promise you that." And he kept that promise. Together, we went to the police, filing a formal complaint against Mark. They listened intently as I recounted every instance of his harassment, every inappropriate comment and touch. When they heard about the hidden camera in my lamp, they finally took action, securing a warrant to search Mark's house. Meanwhile, I recorded our next few encounters, every lewd comment he made, every inappropriate advance he tried. I documented it all, building an airtight case against him. Then, when I had enough evidence, I sent it to everyone who needed to know: his wife, the police, my dad's friends, even Mark's boss. The fallout was immediate and brutal. News of Mark's predatory behavior spread like wildfire, ruining his reputation and ending his marriage. He was fired from his job, shunned by our community, everything he'd ever worked for, gone in an instant. But despite all this, Mark still managed to find me one day, cornering me outside my apartment building. His eyes were wild, desperate. "You think you've won?" he sneered, taking a step closer. "This isn't over, you little bitch." I stood my ground, refusing to let him see the fear coursing through me. "Yes, it is," I said firmly. "And if you ever come near me again, I'll make sure everyone knows just how twisted and depraved you really are." Mark lunged at me then, but I was ready. A loud whistle pierced the air as Tom appeared from nowhere, a can of pepper spray pointed straight at Mark's face. "Back off," Tom growled, his voice low and menacing. "Or I swear to God, I will make your eyes water so bad you'll wish you were blind." Mark hesitated, then took a step back, glaring at me one last time, before slinking away into the shadows. As soon as he was gone, Tom turned to me, his expression softening. "Are you okay?" I nodded, taking a deep breath to steady myself. "Yeah," I said, smiling weakly. "I think I finally am." Because for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt safe. Protected. And most importantly, heard. Mark might not be behind bars yet, but his world had crumbled around him, just like he'd done to mine. And now, it was only a matter of time before justice caught up with him. Until then, I would keep fighting, keep speaking out, and make sure no one else suffered at the hands of monsters like Mark ever again. As days turned into weeks, I started to feel like Mark was finally becoming a thing of the past. His threats had stopped, his name barely whispered anymore. It seemed like he'd slunk back into whatever hole he'd crawled out of, defeated and disgraced. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Not really. People like Mark don't just disappear. They lurk in the shadows, waiting for their chance to strike again. And so, I waited too, always vigilant, never letting my guard down. Then one day, while scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon a post from an old acquaintance, a girl around my age who'd gone missing years ago. Her family had recently received an anonymous message containing a video of her, clearly distressed and frightened. The police were investigating, but they needed help identifying the person in the background. Something about the video sent chills down my spine. It felt familiar somehow. I clicked on the link, watching as the grainy footage played out before me. And then, suddenly, I saw it, a glimpse of a hand, a flash of a tattoo. A tattoo I'd seen countless times before. My heart pounded in my chest as realization dawned on me. This wasn't just some random video, this was Mark's doing. He'd been involved in something far darker and more sinister than any of us could have imagined. With shaking hands, I called the police, telling them everything I knew about Mark, his obsession with watching us, his twisted fantasies, his threats against me. They listened intently, their expressions growing grimmer by the second. "We'll need you to come down to the station," one of them said finally. "We have some questions for you." I agreed, eager to help in any way I could. At the station, they showed me photograph after photograph, asking if I recognized anyone. And then, there he was, a face from Mark's hidden folder, now staring back at me from a police lineup. His name was Lucas, they told me. Another member of the same dark web group as Mark. They'd been sharing more than just videos, they'd been trading victims too. As I sat there, shocked and horrified, the pieces began to fall into place. The missing girls, the secretive online chat rooms, the whispered threats from Mark, it all pointed towards one terrifying conclusion: this was only the beginning. But I wouldn't let fear control me anymore. No, I'd fight back, take down everyone involved in this twisted conspiracy. And so, with newfound determination, I agreed to help the police bring them to justice. Weeks turned into months as we planned our next move. The police set up a sting operation, using my story and evidence against Mark to lure Lucas and his associates into a trap. They'd think they were meeting another potential collector, but instead, they'd find handcuffs waiting for them. And that's exactly what happened one chilly night. As I sat in the unmarked van outside Lucas' house, watching through night vision goggles as the police closed in, I felt a sense of satisfaction wash over me. This was a payback for every twisted moment Mark and his friends had forced upon us. But then something went wrong. A figure darted out from the shadows, breaking away from the group and disappearing into the night. My heart leapt into my throat as I realized who it was: Mark. He'd been there all along, hiding in plain sight while the police focused on his friends. And now, he was getting away. Without thinking, I jumped out of the van, chasing after him as adrenaline surged through me. He couldn't escape, not again, not ever. Not when we were so close to finally ending this nightmare once and for all. We raced through alleys and over fences, our breath visible in the cold night air. And then, suddenly, he was gone. Vanished into thin air like a ghost. I stopped, panting and disoriented, trying to figure out where he could have disappeared to. And that's when I heard it, the soft click of a door opening behind me. I spun around just as Mark lunged at me, his eyes wild with desperation and rage. But this time I was ready. I ducked out of the way, grabbing him by the arm and twisting it behind his back as we fell to the ground. He struggled and cursed, trying everything he could to break free from my grip. But I held on tight, fueled by anger and adrenaline. And then, suddenly, there were voices, loud, commanding shouts, that echoed through the darkness. "Police! Freeze!" Mark went still beneath me, his body tensing as officers swarmed around us, weapons drawn. As they pulled him to his feet, roughly cuffing his hands behind his back, I finally let myself relax. It was over. Finally, truly over. As Mark was led away, he looked back at me, hatred boiling in his eyes. But I didn't look away. Instead, I smiled, a slow, satisfied smile that said more than any words ever could: "You can't hurt me anymore, Mark." Because this time, justice had prevailed. This time, the monster had been unmasked, exposed for all to see. And this time, he'd never be able to hurt anyone again. And as I stood there, watching them drive away into the night, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: my life would never be the same. But neither would his. And that was justice enough for me.